The Northern Ireland Protocol hasn't been changed since it was adopted in 2020. However, something has changed that has unlocked the political deadlock in Northern Ireland. But even with the new UK legislation passed this week, the protocol itself hasn't been changed. Isn't there a contradiction here? The protocol hasn't changed, but some are claiming that it's changed enough to restore the Northern Ireland government. So the UK government has produced a paper and some new legislation this week relating to the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Northern Ireland Protocol was agreed by the EU and UK in 2020. Then we had the Windsor Declaration in 2023. Again, this was agreed between the UK and EU. It didn't change one word of the protocol, but clarified it and did flesh out some of the provisions in a helpful way. Now in 2024, we have new UK legislation on the protocol. This is unilateral legislation being adopted by the UK. And so it's not an agreement with the EU. As with the Windsor Declaration, not a single word of the Northern Ireland Protocol is changed. But the new UK law further clarifies what the protocol actually is. This serves a really important political purpose, which is to restore the Northern Ireland government. Whatever else we might say about it, I think that Sunak and the UK government deserve some credit here. I must be going soft. I've been giving Sunak such a hard time recently. This political achievement is very significant, however. So whatever actually has changed or not, we can acknowledge that some good work has been done here. The fact that we've heard very little from the EU about it is interesting. This is UK legislation that clarifies some provisions in the Northern Ireland Protocol. However, it seems to be the case that the changes have been discussed with the EU and they must have informally been okayed. Again, we have to give some credit here to Sunak's government for dramatically improving relations with the EU. This is a big difference from the Johnson Truss era. However, the fact that this is a unilateral provision adopted by the UK and not a joint agreement with the EU suggests that it doesn't actually change anything substantial in the protocol. The EU, of course, wouldn't accept any changes without further negotiation and a bilateral agreement. So this is the truth. The Northern Ireland Protocol has not changed one bit, and there's still a border in the Irish Sea. However, this does not mean that the new legislation is meaningless. So the Green Channel is no longer called the Green Channel. Nothing substantive has changed about the Green Channel, but this is a complete rebranding of it. And this makes sense to me. One of the first videos I did last year explained the red and green channels under the protocol. Let's just quickly summarise what the red and green channels established by the Windsor Declaration are. The starting point is that any products moving between GB and Northern Ireland that are at risk of being moved into Ireland will be subject to EU customs on entry into Northern Ireland. This is the so-called red lane. This customs point is effectively in the Irish Sea, which is absolutely necessary to avoid a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. There's no way round this. There has to be a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland or in the Irish Sea. In terms of which products are considered to be at risk of being moved into the Irish market, the EU and UK have agreed a list. These goods must go through the Red Channel and face the full EU customs treatment. If it can be proved that goods going through the Red Channel in fact stayed in Northern Ireland, then any import duties paid can be reclaimed. The Windsor Declaration set out that if products are not at risk, subject to certain conditions, they can go through the Green Channel with no border checks and without full customs declarations, although it has to be noted that simplified declarations must still be made for all products going through the Green Channel, so it's not the same as moving goods between England and Wales. In all honesty, nothing has changed about the Green Channel really. The one key difference is that the Green Channel is being rebranded as the UK Internal Market System. I actually think this is a smart idea. Calling it the Green Channel is terminology associated with a customs border. Under the Northern Ireland Protocol, the Green Channel actually was never a customs border. Rather, it's a kind of system to monitor the quantities of goods going into Northern Ireland through the Green Channel in order to be able to see if it's being misused. But it's definitely the case that calling it the Green Channel made it sound like a customs border. So this is a really useful rebranding. Although there may be some checking and there definitely are data requirements, it's not a customs border. So the term UK internal market system is helpful because it moves away from the idea that it is a customs border. It makes sense that in the political context, perceptions of what this monitoring system is really matter. So this isn't just rhetoric. I think it's a smart thing to do. One area where the UK has legislated beyond what's required by the protocol relates to labelling of certain retail products as not for EU. The Windsor Declaration requires this label should be on the packaging of certain retail products going through the Green Channel. It was agreed that the label not for EU should be applied to products considered high risk, including meat, dairy, fruit, vegetables and fish. The new legislation goes further than this. Whereas the Northern Ireland Protocol only requires such products going from GB to Northern Ireland to have the label, the UK government is now making it a requirement for all relevant products sold in the UK to have this not for EU label, even if the product is made and sold only in Great Britain. As with the rebranding of the Green Channel, this could change the perception of the protocol. Rather than Northern Ireland appearing to be singled out, all applicable products sold in GB will have the same requirement. Also, it means that whereas some GB manufacturers may have pulled out of the Northern Ireland market in order to avoid having the costs of applying this label, they now have to do it whether selling to Northern Ireland or not. This was a concern that choice in Northern Ireland supermarkets was being reduced by this labelling requirement. You might say that this is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. There could also be a knock-on effect of this for companies in GB producing products covered by the labelling requirements. They may be exporting some of these products to the EU, which is perfectly legitimate if going directly and not via Northern Ireland. But it could be confusing if those products have not for EU on them, so that could mean extra costs for some businesses to produce separate packaging or apply labels over the not for EU label. None of this is straightforward. One final point relates to the legislative process for these changes. The legislation is being rushed through this week. There's a good reason for this in political terms, so that the Northern Ireland executive can be up and running as quickly as possible. However, I do have concerns about the lack of consultation and Parliament's scrutiny of the legislation. So much really technical post-Brexit regulation has been passed as so-called secondary legislation, which means that it has much less scrutiny than if it is passed as primary legislation. Although this legislation is to help the political process in Northern Ireland, it is still making substantial customs legislation. I worry that not enough of the post-Brexit UK legislation has been getting enough scrutiny. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.